Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Bulldog Chronicles. Today we're going to feature one of our staff members at the Alabama A&M Athletics Department, Mr. Dana Gillis. Dana, how you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Well, Dana, if you could please tell the Bulldog faithful about yourself.
Well, just a little background. I have been the Director of Athletic Compliance here at A&M University for a little over a year now. And finally got to the point where we're kind of putting in some new things to help the football teams, all of our sports teams, be compliant in everything that they do relative to participation in NCAA sports at the Division I level.
Can you mention some things about compliance? Because, you know, the average fan doesn't really understand those rules because, you know, the book is so thick that each and every day we're learning the new rules that are coming out every year. Can you just mention a few things about compliance?
I think the thing to keep in mind about compliance is it's really put in place to help the student athlete to make sure that number one, they keep the student in student athlete, and it's all about ensuring that student athletes are going to class, that they're meeting certain academic requirements relative to progressing towards a degree, because at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about. Getting out there, competing, doing something that you love, but at the same time, at the end of 4 years, you want to walk out of this institution with a 4-year degree.
You're right, and that's the key role in all athletes, student athletes, because they're first students, then they're athletes.
Absolutely.
So, I know they keep you busy, I know.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much and so many different moving parts to making sure that the teams are ready to compete.
Okay. Dana, we're here not only for your compliance aspect of your job, but September 15th, 1963, the nation is aware of an unfortunate incident in Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 young ladies lost their lives in the 16th Street Baptist Church. Recently, AL.com did a feature and a follow-up on that. Dana, if you can please just enlighten us on your role in that situation.
Well, prior to becoming Director of Compliance here at Alabama A&M University, I was a special agent with the FBI for 24 years. And in my last assignment here at Huntsville, I was responsible for coordinating the Civil Rights Program, investigative program for the FBI out of Birmingham. So as part of my responsibilities, back in 2009, the FBI was sending out letters to families regarding what was called the Civil Rights Cold Case Initiative. And it was through this initiative that a number of old civil rights cases dating back to the early 1960s were reopened, and the FBI and the Department of Justice were trying to bring to justice a number of individuals that had perpetrated some really heinous crimes against minorities during the civil rights movement. What was interesting about the role that I had with the 16th Street bombing case is there's a little known facet of history that transpired later on that day where 2 African American males were killed. And that's really written about, people don't really know about it. And one of those individuals was named Johnny Robinson. Johnny Robinson was a teenage African American male who was on the scene of the church later that day, and there was an altercation between individuals that were taunting people that were trying to clear up the rubble from the church. Of course, you had the mourners of individuals that were killed in the bombing, and this individual was actually killed in the aftermath of the bombing.
Yeah, the AL.com mentioned that Johnny's was with a group of boys near the gas station in the 800 block of 26th Street that afternoon around 3 p.m. and everyone on the street was on edge. After the bombing at the church, carloads of young white people were driving by, taunting the young black people on the street with chants of like 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. And unfortunately that happened. James Jensen's, one of Johnny's friends who was playing football nearby, some of those same young men who were taunting the group of boys, some of the same young men who were being taunted at started throwing rocks at the white teenagers, police said. The Birmingham News at the time reported that when the police car arrived, the black boys started running down 8th Alley North. The car blocked the alley and Jack Parker, the officer in the back seat, pointed a shotgun from the window. And of course, you mentioned what happened from there. fired actually a warning shot at the boys who were running away. And due to that warning shot, unfortunately, Johnny Robinson was hit with a buckshot in his back and wrist. And when he got to University Hospital, unfortunately, a young man had passed. Also, Diane Samuels, who's now 65, talking about her brother, mentioned some things about that day. So, you know, those two young men unfortunately had passed along with those young ladies. Just unfortunate incidents in those situations. Dana, can you tell us exactly what did you do as far as your role for the FBI in relating to the families about what could be done about that?
Yeah, what happened is this cold case initiative basically came about based on a reinvestigation of the Emmett Till murder and lynching. As you recall, Emmett Till was killed for allegedly whistling at a white woman in the Deep South back in the mid to late 1950s. Well, because the FBI was able to successfully, years later, prosecute the perpetrator of that crime, all these other civil rights cases were reopened so that we could take a look at it and basically try to help families get a sense of closure or potentially prosecute and bring to justice those that were involved in the crimes. In this particular instance, Officer Parker died in the 1970s, so he was unable to be brought to trial. But what was significant is that the family, for the first time, got the details of what transpired that day. The family knew that Johnny Robinson died at the hands of a police officer, but back in 1963, the local police weren't going to go to the family to try to tell them what happened. Really was not a search for bringing the officer to trial relative to getting justice for the family for Johnny's life.
And the Robinson family would know little about what happened to their brother until 2009, as you mentioned, when the FBI reopened the investigation.
Yeah, what happened was the investigation was reopened, and it was one of a number of investigations opened in 2007. And at the conclusion of the reviews of these cases in 2009, that was when the Department of Justice basically sent letters to families, especially those where witnesses had died or the perpetrators of the crime were no longer living. So this was the first time that the family actually got the details, and hearing that, you know, there were 4 police officers in a cruiser. The cruiser was following Johnny and friends as they went down into that alley that you mentioned earlier, and that a shotgun blast was what actually killed Johnny Robinson. So that was the first time the family had gotten those details, and as well as I was able to talk about some of the eyewitness statements that were made in the original investigation by the police department in 1963, as well as the officer statements. I think one of the officers alleged that the shotgun went off when the car rode over a bump in the road, or the shotgun went off, I think another officer stated that it happened because the driver of the patrol car slammed on his brakes. You know, it wasn't that it was a deliberate shot, and that was the thing that we could actually bring to light for the family.
Now, it says that you actually hand-delivered the letter to the Robinson family. Can you tell us about that situation, how they felt once they realized who you were? And although you are African American, being that the Robinson family had to endure this from the 60s until 2009, tell us how that interaction took place.
Well, I can tell you from my standpoint, I'm a student of civil rights. I mean, I've read the books by Taylor Branch that delved into the life of Martin Luther King Jr. And his influence on the civil rights era. So to actually reach out and be able to touch base with a piece of that history was a significant moment for me. And I remember when I made contact telephonically with the family and made arrangements to go to their home and deliver this letter. Not only was the family there, they had several friends of the family that were there, local community leaders, and I felt like I was part of a significant act of history, and that I could now give a family the story of what happened, letting them know the truth behind the death of a loved one. You know, it was my hope that we could have found someone to prosecute, but with the death of the officer, that wasn't possible. But by the same token, it was a very poignant moment to be able to meet with that family and give them not necessarily a sense of closure. I mean, that's what you hope for, but at least they have another piece of that puzzle as to why such a tragic event occurred on top of the death of those 4 little girls.
And now, although your role was not as inclusive as other individuals who rose in the civil rights era, you still are a part of history in that situation because you had to serve in your role as a member of the FBI Civil Rights Division, and you had to deliver this information to the Robinson family, because I did not learn about those 2 young men who passed until reading this article on September 15th, and now the Bulldog faithful have more information into this role. You talk about that one of the young men. Tell us about Virgil Ware. Do you know, were you a part of that investigation as well, or was he as similar to Johnny Robinson, where he was accidentally struck with the shots from the buckshot? Or can you tell us a bit more about that?
That was actually a separate investigation.
Okay.
I really didn't have anything to do with that particular case. My focus had been with the Robinson family, and one of the things that the FBI tried to do was to make sure that the families had contact with one particular agent. I mean, it was significant if you think back to the original FBI investigation of what happened in '63. I can guarantee you there wasn't somebody that looked like me that showed up to conduct that investigation. But I think it probably helped the family to see how far that the country has come, given that now there's an African American FBI agent at the door that's telling them about what happened to their beloved family member.
I remember when the FBI came out in the news and said that they were going to open up those civil rights era cases, and there was a lot of support, but there was also a lot of backlash from a lot of the families who knew of what their family members had done and were asking the FBI and other politicians, state representatives, state senators to allow their families to, kind of realize their mistakes in the past and allow that situation to pass. But as the FBI mentioned, these families deserve closure, because the civil rights era, a lot of people passed that we don't know. We just recently learned about one of the primary men who helped the March on Washington. It wasn't all Martin Luther King. It wasn't all the NAACP president, but it was another young man who was living a life as a gay man that did not get the recognition because his life was not accepted at that time as a gay man, an African American gay man at that. So how do you feel the FBI civil rights era cases have gone along?
I think it was a significant step by the FBI and the Department of Justice to really unravel some of the history that was unknown. Like, until this particular investigation, nobody knew about Johnny Robinson. And, was that
Virgil Ware.
And Virgil Ware. Were those deaths insignificant or any less significant than the 4 little girls that died in that church bombing? Absolutely not. And it's an opportunity to tell the story to the American public. And I know there was a lot of misgiving on the part of some families because they didn't want to dredge up that pain and agony of reliving those events. But there was also, that faction of whites throughout the South. They wanted to let sleeping dogs lie. They didn't want to go through that again. There's a lot of resentment about the FBI doing that. But because of the efforts of the FBI, you did have significant movement on cases like Emmett Till, where people were brought to justice. And you've actually still got one of those individuals in jail because of that crime that happened over 40 years.
Medgar Evers
absolutely
murderer was brought to justice with that. 2 very, very significant young people that was a part of the civil rights era, and their murderers were brought to justice. So they have some wins in those situations, and I think that it helps to have major wins like the murder of Emmett Till, the murder of Medgar Evers. I really don't believe the African American community believes that the young man that's serving time right now for the death of Martin Luther King actually is a person that pulled the trigger. But I'm pretty sure the FBI has that civil rights case open, and we might know, we might never know. That's just the situation that we're in. As long as some families are allowed closure in some situations, we never know about some of the deaths when young African Americans were protesting and they got hosed and were attacked by dogs. Some of those individuals passed away. We'll never know who those individuals were. But as long as the FBI continues to plug, continues to work hard, do you feel as though they'll be able to try to find closure and bring these individuals to justice? Because these individuals now are we talking about late 60s, 70s, 80s, and a lot of these individuals have probably passed, and their families have just completely closed the door and probably have gotten rid of all evidence about their participation in these events.
Well, I think, the FBI's investigations of the cases, at least for the most part, the initiative itself has been closed down.
Mm-hmm.
But the FBI continues significant efforts in the areas of civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
Those cases that have gone on since that time in other different areas related to police brutality, housing, fair housing, Discrimination Act violations. It's just one of those things that the FBI now has a legacy and a track record that hopefully gives the public confidence, and the public can continue to look at institutions like the FBI and the Department of Justice as a place to go for justice, especially when you still have cases like the Trayvon Martins of the world that take place on a daily basis around the country.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that, and I mean, we look at these situations now. A young man who played football at FAMU, North Carolina, was shot and killed. Immediately, that investigation found out that police officer shot this young man. This young man had a wreck at 3 a.m. in the morning. He was hurt. He was trying to go to someone's house. They called 911. They thought he was a burglar. She called the police. He was trying to come to them, waving his hands, telling them, I'm hurt. The officer shot him. Officer got arrested. Voluntary manslaughter. Because, those onboard dash cameras on a police officer's vehicle, that helps out those situations. Because of that and because of investigations. The Trayvon Martin case, we look at those situations, but then Florida has to turn right around and look at other cases similarly where there was a young mother who was severely beaten by the father of her children, and she protected herself. She was at home. He came over there. She was afraid. She killed him, and now she's serving time for that with 3 young children, out without a mother, and they're trying to fight for her case. So, because the FBI has that information going out, because their presence is, if you don't prosecute, if you don't really take a close look at these situations more, with a fine-tooth comb, then we are going to come in and we're going to find everything. Because what you don't find, we can find. And I believe that justice is being served, not in every situation. We can look at the University of Alabama situation. Recently in the news, there was one of the sororities that was told by their alumni not to allow any minorities, not just African Americans. And that's where we got to look at it. Not just African Americans, but also Mexican Americans. Miss America now, she's Indian American. And she's been fighting a lot of backlash, a lot of racial inequality coming at her. And her first press conference was defending herself about being an American. So it's not even about African Americans anymore. It's about just being equal for everyone. And the FBI has really set that precedence with that. So what do you think your thoughts are with that?
I think, what I have really been impressed with is the way in which the FBI has stepped up to promote and protect the rights of everyone. Mm-hmm. And there was a law that came out of a death investigation back in the late 1990s in Texas, James Byrne. Mm-hmm. He was a black man that was dragged behind a pickup truck until his body just about disintegrated, is what it amounted to. And then you had a case regarding a homosexual male at the University of Wyoming, Matthew Shepard, out in, I think it was near Casper, Wyoming. Mm-hmm. It was those cases that resulted in the James Byrd-Matthew Shepard Act, which basically protects everyone equally with regard to their personal rights. And the FBI is the enforcer of those acts. And I think that's one of the things that the FBI does really well, because they want to protect the rights of every person, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation.
You're right.
And those rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution, that's what the FBI is sworn to uphold.
Now, tell us about this hate crime law, where if individuals are deemed to have murdered someone or attacked someone based on their race, their sexuality, their gender, can you give us a little bit more intel about this hate crime law?
Well, I mean, from a federal standpoint, that's what really grew out of James Byrd, Matthew Shepard. And it ensures that if you can prove that race, sexual orientation, gender, things along those lines, basically, if it's because of who a person is that crime was perpetrated, the Department of Justice and the FBI will do whatever it takes to prosecute those individuals to the full extent of the law.
Okay. So you're very versed in those 24 years in the law. So transitioning to athletic compliance on a Division I level was something kind of similar to what you've been done in the past. But now you're dealing with 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, and it seems as though maybe do you have to remind them of the compliance rules more often?
I think it's just taking what I did in the law enforcement world, putting it into a new context.
Okay.
You know, it's still all about the interpretation of bylaws versus the interpretation of constitutional laws, and it's applying those things. And I think the difference is I'm trying to utilize those laws to help student athletes, whereas I was reactive in other manner of dealing with the constitutional laws of the United States.
Okay.
So here I'm trying to help people before the fact as well as after the fact, but in law enforcement it was, at least from the federal standpoint, a lot of it was after the fact.
Okay. Well, Dana, this has been an enlightening conversation with one of Alabama A&M Athletics' own. But before we let you go, we got to get some personal information about you. We got to know what we ask all student athletes, and we're going to ask everyone we put on the Bulldog Chronicles. What do you do when you're not at Alabama A&M ensuring the student athletes or being compliant, making sure everyone is following the rules? What do you do to relax?
I am the biggest music fan on the planet. Big jazz fan, so listening to jazz, going to live jazz concerts. And of course, since I'm in athletics, I'm a big sports fan. So you know I'm tuned into ESPN 24/7.
Of course, and of course we know what your favorite NFL team is.
Yes, we do. How about them Cowboys?
You just got a lot of fans, my son. I'm pretty sure. So how about them Cowboys? But we want to thank you, Dana, for taking time out today and enlightening us on some new rules and laws and compliance rules and just your role in the civil rights era. We are blessed at Alabama A&M to have an individual like yourself here, and we wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. It was my pleasure. Go Bulldogs.